You know that feeling when you set your alarm for 6 a.m.? Like the night before, you were just this absolute motivational
Oh
powerhouse.
yeah, totally unstoppable.
Right. You are fully prepared to conquer the world. You're going to hit the gym. You're going to draft a novel, drink a gallon of water, whatever. But then 6 a.m. actually rolls around, the alarm goes off, and suddenly you are a hostage negotiator.
You're bargaining for your life.
Exactly. You are desperately bargaining with yourself for just 10 more minutes of sleep, and you completely betray the person you were just 8 hours ago.
It is, honestly, the defining human predicament. You go to sleep as one person, and you literally wake up as someone completely different, operating under an entirely different set of priorities.
It's so frustrating.
It is, but it's because the human brain just isn't a single rational actor.
Hmm.
We were dealing with the divided self. You have this planner self who architects these rational long-term decisions, and then you have the doer self who is short-sighted and just ruthlessly driven by immediate gratification,
So today, we are figuring out how to hack that fundamental weakness of will. We're taking a deep dive into the architecture of self-control.
which we all need.
Seriously. We're looking at the internal lies we tell ourselves, and then we are pushing all the way into some truly wild, high-stakes external solutions.
Oh, the external ones are intense.
Yeah, we have a massive stack of sources today. We're pulling from behavioral economics platforms like Stick and BeMinder, an NBER study on temptation bundling, Jen Sincero's book Badass Habits, a really personal essay on using anti-charities, and even this dense philosophical paper on outsourcing our self-control to artificial intelligence.
It is quite the journey.
Okay, let's unpack this, because we're going from simple internal mindset shifts to a future where we literally outsource our discipline to sassy robots.
What's fascinating here is that to understand any of those extreme external frameworks, we first have to examine the underlying condition of that divided self we just talked about.
Right, the planner versus the doer.
Exactly. When the planner sets a goal, the doer almost always rebels. And the reason for that rebellion isn't just laziness. It is deeply rooted in how our brains construct our reality.
Which brings us to the framework from Jen Sincero in Badass Habits. She argues that habits aren't just isolated actions. It's not just like choosing a salad over a burger.
Yeah.
Habits are intrinsically tied to your identity. It's about who you believe you are being.
And that distinction changes the entire approach to self-discipline. Actions are always downstream from identity.
Makes sense.
If your internal narrative is, I'm a lazy person who is trying to exercise, your brain has to expend a massive amount of cognitive energy trying to bridge the gap between that established self-image and your new behavior.
And the brain hates expending energy.
It despises it. The brain wants to conserve energy, so it automates behaviors that align with our deepest beliefs.
Sincero illustrates this with this really fascinating story about her brother, Stephen. He worked as a diamond sorter.
Oh, this story is wild.
Right. So over time, his brain adapted so completely to his environment that he developed this unconscious, like crow-like habit of spotting shiny objects wherever he went.
It's completely automated.
Totally. His wife actually lost a tiny diamond pendant in the leaf-covered streets of Santa Fe, and Stephen just went out with a flashlight and found it in an hour.
Wow.
It wasn't a conscious, strenuous effort anymore. The repetition of his job had physically built these deep neural pathways until the action of spotting tiny, gleaming objects became completely effortless.
But the psychological hurdle for the rest of us is that our primal need to be right about who we are is directly tied to our biological need to feel safe.
Wait, really? How so?
Well, we unconsciously absorb these habitual beliefs from childhood, right? And they become the invisible scaffolding of our reality. So we actually fear changing our habits because abandoning our established narrative, even if it's a really negative narrative, like, oh, I have no self-control, abandoning that threatens our baseline sense of security.
Oh, I see.
The brain perceives a shift in that baseline as a literal existential threat.
So trying to change your habits without fundamentally changing your identity is it's like wearing a superhero costume, but you're still terrified of heights.
That's a great way to put it.
Like eventually, you're going to take the suit off.
Yeah.
The hardware is actively rejecting the new code to protect its stability. We would literally prefer miserable familiarity over the unpredictable unknown.
Which is the precise mechanism of self-sabotage. When you rely on sheer willpower without rewriting the underlying code of your identity, the hardware eventually forces a reboot. Your brain pulls you right back to your established baseline.
But Sincero points out that to rewrite that code and successfully install the new habit, it takes about 66 days.
Roughly, yeah.
But surviving those 66 days requires what she calls the 0-second rule. It is a state of absolute non-negotiation with yourself.
No bargaining.
None. The second the 6 a.m. alarm goes off or the craving hits, you just act. You deny your brain even a single second to initiate the bargaining process. It's like jumping into a freezing pool before your brain has the chance to talk you out of it.
And the underlying logic there is that the moment you allow the internal negotiation to begin, the doer self has already won.
Oh, for sure.
Because the doer is armed with this entire arsenal of rationalizations that are perfectly optimized for immediate comfort. The 0-second rule is just a tactic to bypass that internal debate entirely. You're moving faster than the rationalization process can even boot up.
But relying exclusively on that 0-second rule for 66 days is incredibly exhausting.
Oh, it's brutal. Willpower is a finite resource.
Exactly. Eventually, the operating system is going to crash, and your internal discipline will just give out. So if the internal game is that fragile, we have to look at external architecture. We have to figure out how to force our future selves to behave when our willpower fails.
And that shift from internal willpower to external constraint brings us to the concept of the Ulysses Pact.
Right, the Greek myth.
Yeah, it's this classic strategy of assisted self-constraint designed to combat what the Greeks called akrasia, which basically just means weakness of will.
So Ulysses wants to sail past the sirens, and he really wants to hear their beautiful song, but he knows that the song drives sailors mad and forces them to steer their ships into the rocks.
Right, it's a death sentence.
He knows his future self will be entirely compromised, so his present self alters the environment to remove his future self's agency. He literally orders his crew to tie him to the mast with strict instructions not to untie him, no matter how desperately he begs.
He is deliberately outsourcing his self-control.
Yeah.
And the modern digital application of this Ulysses Pact relies heavily on behavioral economics, specifically this principle of loss aversion.
Which is so powerful.
It really is. Loss aversion dictates that the psychological pain of losing an asset is roughly twice as intense as the pleasure of gaining that exact same asset.
And we see this weaponized on a platform called Stick. It was founded by Dean Carlin and Ian Ayres, two behavioral economists from Yale.
Yeah, brilliant platform.
So you state a goal and you put a financial wager on the line. The data they've collected is incredibly revealing. If you create a contract with no financial stakes, your success rate is only about 42.7%.
Barely above chance.
Right. But if you put your own money on the line, leveraging that standard loss aversion, the success rate nearly doubles to 82.8%.
But the architecture becomes truly potent when you introduce the concept of the anti-charity.
Yes.
If you designate that your forfeited money will be donated to an organization you fundamentally despise, the success rate jumps to 87.1%.
That is insane.
You are engineering an environment where your weakness of will is suddenly pitted against your deepest moral outrage.
One of our sources, an essay by Kyle Thierman, details this exact extreme measure. He was struggling to quit drinking, feeling constantly sluggish, so he wrote a check for $1,000.
$1,000.
$1,000. And he made it payable to an organization called A-Leak. They're a legislative group that lobbies for private prisons, and they actively work to block plastic bag bans.
So, things he strongly opposes.
Exactly. Causes he personally finds abhorrent. He handed the check to a friend with strict instructions to mail it if he had even a single sip of alcohol.
And it worked.
It kept him sober for 10 months. He would politely decline beers because he literally imagined every single sip funding things he hated. He even repeated the strategy later, putting $500 on the line to curb his Instagram doom scrolling.
It is a highly effective manipulation of your own environment.
Here's where it gets really interesting, though, because I have to push back on this. Isn't giving money to an organization you despise incredibly risky? What if you accidentally fund the very thing you hate? Like, $1,000 is a lot of money to send to a cause you think harms the world.
I get that, but the risk you're pointing out is exactly why the architecture functions. If there was no genuine terror of that collateral damage, the system would just collapse.
So it has to be a real threat.
Yes. To understand the mechanics of why this works, you have to apply game theory. Specifically, you are basically playing a single-player version of the prisoner's dilemma.
Oh, okay. So instead of two accomplices deciding whether to betray each other to the police, you are playing against yourself across time.
Precisely. Your present self wants to cooperate with your long-term goals. But your future self is heavily incentivized to defect, to drink the beer or skip the gym, because the reward is immediate and the cost of defecting is deferred.
Right.
By introducing the anti-charity, you radically alter that payoff matrix. The immediate cost of defecting becomes so psychologically and morally devastating that your future self is essentially cornered into cooperating with your present self.
Okay, but the problem with the system that relies entirely on punishing defection is what happens when you actually do defect.
Yep.
Right. A high-stakes system only works if you don't stick your head in the sand when you slip up. And human psychology does not handle failure well. So we have to look at the mechanics of accountability, specifically the difference between hard accountability and soft accountability.
Yeah, this is a crucial distinction. Hard accountability is the literal penalty. It's the missed deadline, the forfeited money, the check getting mailed to the anti-charity. Soft accountability, on the other hand, is their relational infrastructure.
The people side of it.
Exactly. It's the proactive, honest communication of your failure to your referee or your partner.
There's a brilliant case study on this in a post from BeMinder, which is a platform that actually specializes in hard accountability.
Oh yeah, I know this one.
So the author describes a pact he made with a friend where they both committed to writing 1,000 words a day. If either of them failed, they owed the other person $100 for that specific day.
That's a steep penalty.
It is. But the entire system silently imploded. One of them fell behind, and instead of paying the $100, the shame kicked in. He stopped updating their shared spreadsheet, he avoided his partner, and the habit just completely bled out over 9 days. No one ever paid the penalty.
And that perfectly exposes the critical vulnerability in extreme commitment devices. When the stakes are that punitive, the shame of failure triggers a flood response.
We just run away.
We do. We completely disengage from the soft accountability, the communication, because acknowledging the failure makes the hard accountability real. We literally prefer to hide and pretend the contract never existed.
The author cites a quote from Eugene Gendlin that perfectly captures the fallacy of that flight response. He says, "What is true is already so. Not being open about it doesn't make it go away."
That is profound.
If you miss the deadline, the reality is that you missed it. Hiding from your accountability partner doesn't alter the fabric of reality. It just destroys the integrity of the system and your trust in your own word.
Which tells us that relying solely on negative reinforcement and loss aversion is ultimately brittle.
Too brittle.
A sustainable architecture needs positive structures to balance the punitive ones. And this brings us to a really elegant economic solution for integrating the divided self, which was developed in a study by the National Bureau of Economic Research.
This is the temptation bundling study by Milkman and Volpe. The premise is surprisingly straightforward. You just combine an instantly gratifying want experience with a valuable should behavior.
Right.
They did this study at a gym where they gave participants iPods loaded with highly addictive page-turner audiobooks. The critical constraint was that the participants could only access those audiobooks while they were physically exercising at the gym.
And the data was amazing. That single restriction increased gym attendance by 51%.
51%.
Yeah, and interestingly, after the study concluded, 61% of the participants stated they would willingly pay for a device that legally restricted their access to the audiobooks, forcing them to only listen at the gym.
They actively wanted to purchase their own constraint. But, looking at the mechanics of temptation bundling, isn't this essentially just treating ourselves like toddlers? Like, you can only have your iPad time if you finish your broccoli.
Well, I mean, it might sound simplistic, but mathematically, it is a highly sophisticated override of a cognitive bias called hyperbolic discounting.
Okay, what is that?
Hyperbolic discounting is our tendency to drastically devalue a reward the further away it is in time. The physiological benefits of going to the gym won't manifest for months, so the doer self discounts that value to almost zero in the present moment. Meanwhile, the physical discomfort of the treadmill is immediate and undeniable.
So the internal calculation is a high immediate cost paired with a zero immediate reward. Naturally, the brain chooses the couch.
Exactly. Temptation bundling rewires that entire calculation. You eliminate the short-term cost of the should behavior by overwhelming it with the immediate intense reward of the want behavior. You bypass hyperbolic discounting entirely.
Oh, because you're no longer going to the gym for a deferred health benefit, you are going to the gym to resolve the cliffhanger in your audiobook right now.
Yes. You are tricking the doer self into executing the planner self's agenda.
Okay, so we have explored using our own money, leveraging our moral outrage, and deploying audiobooks to architect our environment. But all of these systems still rely on human referees or our own flawed follow-through.
They do.
What happens when we remove the human element entirely and just outsource our Ulysses packs to technology?
Oh, that leap takes us into some fascinating philosophical territory explored by Bruno Granch in his paper on artificial intelligence.
This part is wild.
Granch analyzes the implications of cultured technology. This is a framework where AI is deliberately programmed to simulate tact, manners, and highly socio-sensitive behavior.
We already see primitive versions of this, right? Like smart assistants that respond positively when kids say please and thank you.
Exactly. But Granch elevates this by anchoring it in Immanuel Kant's philosophy on politeness. Kant argued that societal politeness is actually a beneficial deception.
A deception.
Yeah, when someone greets you with, "It is a joy to see you," they might not literally mean it. It's a fabricated illusion. But Kant argues that this illusion is structurally necessary. It establishes a polite distance that stops us from treating each other merely as instruments for our own utility. It's basically a behavioral lubricant for society.
Fake it till you make it to virtue, basically.
Pretty much. By applying Kant's beneficial deception to AI, we aren't just trying to make machines pleasant conversation partners. We are establishing the foundation for what Granch terms the sassy assistant.
The sassy assistant. This is where this gets wildly futuristic.
It really does. The concept is an AI program to function as an incorruptible Ulysses crew. It is an assistant designed to facilitate your higher-level, long-term goals by explicitly denying your lower-level, short-term requests.
So this is like having a GPS system in your car that evaluates your health data and literally refuses to give you directions to a donut shop, regardless of what you command it to do.
Yes.
Or a smart fridge that automatically engages a physical lock at 10 p.m. You're installing an artificial crew whose primary directive is to disobey your compromised orders.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, the mechanics of this solve the two fatal flaws in human action: the time gap and the awareness gap.
Okay, break those down.
The time gap is the reality we discussed earlier. The planner who sets the goal on Sunday is biologically not the same doer who has to execute it on Wednesday. The awareness gap is our tendency to just lose sight of our overarching objectives the moment we get distracted by an immediate craving.
And the sassy assistant possesses neither of those flaws.
Exactly. A machine does not suffer from acrasia. It doesn't get tired, it cannot be tempted by hyperbolic discounting, and it's immune to the rationalizations of the doer self. If we can accept the harmless deception of a polite, cultured AI, we can use its rigid programming to strictly enforce the parameters we set when our planner self was in a clear state of mind.
It is the flawless Ulysses Pact because the software cannot be guilt-tripped and it doesn't feel shame.
Right.
But this introduces a massive ethical blind spot. If we are going to populate our homes and our devices with AI that actively shapes, restricts, and corrects our behavior, who exactly is determining the parameters of that good behavior?
That is the central ethical dilemma of cultured technology. It forces us to confront what the philosopher Hegel called the objective spirit.
The objective spirit, which refers to the invisible web of human customs, traditions, and the overarching moral standards that dictate acceptable behavior within a society.
Yes. And historically, the objective spirit evolves organically. It shifts over centuries, driven by millions of micro-interactions across diverse populations. It's decentralized, meaning it isn't subject to the deliberate top-down design of any single human authority.
But Granch points out that the moment tech giants, who he refers to as the lords of the siren servers, begin programming cultured AI, that entire paradigm shifts.
A huge shift.
A handful of software engineers and executives in Silicon Valley are now deliberately architecting the objective spirit and deploying it on a global scale.
It is an unprecedented exercise in digital paternalism. If an AI is globally standardized to enforce a specific program definition of virtue or politeness, who decides what is appropriate? What happens to minority cultures or to perfectly harmless behavioral deviations when a singular monolithic algorithm is dictating how humans should interact with their environment?
So, what does this all mean? Think about the device you are using to listen to this deep dive right now. If a tech CEO updated its operating system tomorrow so that it monitored your screen time, judged your productivity, and literally locked you out of your apps because the algorithm decided that restriction was virtuous, would you accept that? Are you comfortable with a tech CEO deciding the manners and moral boundaries your smart devices will enforce in your own home?
This raises an important question because the only defense against that paternalism, according to Granch, is the development of massive AI literacy among the general public.
What does that look like?
Consider how ancient theatergoers understood the mechanics of a play. They knew the actors on stage were performing a simulation, right? They didn't mistake the performance for reality. We require that exact same literacy for culture technology. We must constantly recognize the as-if layer of deceptive AI.
Oh, I see.
The moment we forget that a polite, restricting machine is merely a program simulation, we risk becoming instruments of profit for the developers who write the code.
Wow. Okay, we have mapped out a massive architectural shift today. We started by examining the internal hardware, how our primal need for safety ties our habits to our identity, and why the 0-second rule is necessary to bypass our own rationalizations.
A lot of ground covered.
Truly. And when that internal hardware fails, we looked at external casing leveraging loss aversion through anti-charities to make defection financially and morally devastating, while balancing that with temptation bundling to mathematically override hyperbolic discounting.
Great toolkit.
And finally, we explored the frontier of outsourcing our discipline to cultured AI, creating flawless digital Ulysses packs that refuse to obey our worst impulses.
It really is an incredibly robust toolkit for managing the divided self. But integrating these systems leaves us with a final, unresolved thought.
Okay, lay it on us.
If we successfully outsource all of the heavy lifting of self-discipline to anti-charities, external referees, and sassy AI assistants that manage our impulses for us, do we actually become better, more disciplined people?
Mm.
Or do our internal muscles of willpower simply atrophy from disuse, leaving us completely paralyzed and helpless the moment technology gets unplugged?
Oh, wow. If the smart fridge breaks, do you just eat everything inside it because you never actually learned how to say no?
Exactly.
It brings us right back to 6 a.m. When that alarm sounds tomorrow morning, the hostage negotiator is still going to be waiting in your head. You still have to decide which version of yourself gets to win the day. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. Keep questioning the mechanics of your habits, keep examining the systems that shape your behavior, and we will catch you next time.